like anyone can start a business. It's so fantastic. And yeah, it is great and anybody can start a business, but don't expect it to be easy. I guess don't expect it to challenge your sense of yourself. I think that would be the most important thing. If you can deal with yourself and your blocks and hangups, then you can learn all the rest of the stuff. You just have to be able to be ready to embark on the journey.
Welcome to Chase Your Dreams, a podcast for fashion entrepreneurs who want to build a purposeful and profitable clothing business so they can make a living doing what they love. I'm your host, Glynis Tao, an apparel business consultant and SEO specialist with 20 years apparel industry experience. I'm also a mom to a wonderfully energetic little boy named Chase.
Laura Jean Bernhardson has been an entrepreneur since 1994, starting with a handmade knitwear business that she grew into a 7-figure fashion design and retail company. Her boutiques, Fresh Collective, were known for carrying small batch, artisanal clothing and accessories by local designers, including her own lines, baked goods, and palette. But Laura Jean didn't stop at fashion. She also co-founded a licensed daycare business that she ran successfully for over a decade. Over the years, her passion for mentoring other women entrepreneurs evolved into a full-time coaching business. Now, she helps founders grow businesses with heart, passion, and profit without burning out. And she's also on a mission to build a life that feels fun, flowy, and creatively fulfilling. Welcome, Laura Jean. It's so nice to have you here today. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I have to start with a little personal connection. Before I ever became an SEO and business strategist, I lived in Toronto for over 15 years. I went to fashion school at Ryerson University, which is now known as TMU. And I actually remember shopping at one of your store in Kensington Market. It's so fun to have this full circle moment with you. And for those who aren't familiar, can you take us back to those early days and what inspired you to open your first store?
My history is so long that it's hard to know where to start. But I opened my first store in Kensington in 1998, and that was about 3.5 years into my knitwear business. So my knitwear business was called Fresh Baked Goods, and I started on $600 that I borrowed from my roommate at the time, and $200 worth of yarn that I put on my credit card. And I just started knitting and putting sweaters on consignment at different stores and really building the business one sweater at a time. So before I opened the store, I was working on, getting in other stores, starting out with consignment, putting them on consignment and then getting wholesale orders. So I'd have I'd take my samples and people could choose the yarns they wanted, which was actually really good because they could be like, oh, we've got these dresses coming in, so we'll order sweaters. Like it opened up a huge range of colors for them and stuff so they could coordinate their boutiques and everything else. But I ended up opening my store in Kensington. I would say there were sort of two reasons that really spurred me into it. One is I was really getting sick of wholesale. And so wholesale included a lot of, like just production and then packing boxes and then trying to collect on so calling up stores and being like, hi, you owe me $873. And I didn't like that part. So I decided that if I had a store, then I'd have a home base and, I could meet customers one-on-one and sort of get more enjoyment, I guess, out of the creative process and use my materials more wisely and so on. Often I had to like order more of something to fill an order, even though I had, tons of other things available that I could have been selling off or whatever. So for me, it was a good shift in terms of, I guess, energy, like just my own personal way I wanted to spend my time and yeah, having a home base. And the second thing that I think sort of pushed me over, although it's like such ancient history, it was 1998, but I had been in a relationship for about 3 years with a guy and he broke up with me. And I just decided like, that's it. I'm going to open the store. Like it was one of those things I had been wishing someday, etc. And I went out looking for spaces on a Monday, and by Thursday, I had signed the lease at Kensington. So I remember peeking in the window and thinking, oh, yeah, I can make this work. And it was like a tiny space. The rent was only $650 too back then, which was incredibly cheap even for Toronto standards. When I went out looking, I had a budget in mind of 1,500, but I found this place 650 inclusive, and that became my little Kensington shop for probably about 20 years. I closed it in, or 22. I can't do the math, but I closed it in end of 2019. So
29.
that's the, yeah.
That's the history. And you didn't just stop at one location. You grew to 3 retail stores in Toronto. Was that part of a grand plan, or did the opportunity just present itself over time?
I guess over time, there was a fourth store in there. For a stint, I had a store in, I think, about 4 years. So I opened the Kensington store, and then I did a second store in Yorkville within a year, like a year later, along with Peach Berserk. So that was Kingy, Kingy Carpenter is another Toronto designer. And I had worked for her when I started, and she silk screens designs on clothing and stuff. So first I started out working for her and we became friends, and it was great. What do you call it? Like a peek into like, what does it take to have a business, to run a store, etc. And a lot of it scared me, actually. I was like, this is expensive and there's a lot to worry about. And, there's hydro bills and all those things. But thinking, seeing her model and seeing that she was able to do it, I thought, well, if she can do it, I can do it. So we were friends, and she had her store on Queen Street and I had my store in Kensington. And we decided to open a second store together in Yorkville, and we called it Peachy Fresh. So it was half and half her stuff and half mine. But no surprise, we were spread very thin with having the second store that we were running. So we sort of thought, like, how can we make this work where it's not so much work and expense for us? And we thought, we considered things like approaching, we knew a lot of designers. So we thought, what if we got like a third business partner or whatever? But somewhere along the line, we kind of came up with this idea of, I don't know, we're calling it junior business partners or roommates at the time. But what it evolved into was like a collectively run store where designers could join us and work one day a week in the store and pay, a portion of the rent. So we kind of developed I remember the first designer who moved in, she had a glass case from IKEA. And we were like, okay, great, let's put it at the end of the cash desk. And I think we charged her $100 a month rent. And she worked on Tuesdays. And it was just like, oh my God, like one day we don't have to worry about. And I remember handing her over the key and going, good luck, call me if you have any problems. And over time, as more and more of these people joined and so on, it became more of an official thing where it was like, this is now, we started calling it a collective, and it became this, there were 7 designers and 7 days of the week were covered, and it was like, this works. So that was kind of the model that I took to Queen Street when I opened Fresh Collective.
Okay. So what was the retail landscape like in Toronto when you first started, and how did you stand out in such a competitive market?
Well, it's so funny. I would say 100 times less competitive than now. It was just such a different time. Like, this was pre-internet, digital photography, social media, all that stuff. So how did I stand out? I guess what was great is that I had built up a clientele. So because I had done those 3.5 years of doing street markets and the one of a kind show, and I did those still when I had the store too, because those were great outreach. But I do remember, like, the first couple of days after I opened the store, I started to feel panicked because it was not just, people don't just flow into your store and spend money. It's like nerve wracking when you open a store. So I literally went out and did posters. I remember going to Kinko's and photocopying posters and saying, and put them all over Kensington Market. And I'm like, Fresh Baked Goods has a new store in Kensington. And it was like that. It was like old fashioned, getting the word out. But I also had collected up phone numbers because that's how we did things. That's how Gen X did things in those days. So I had phone numbers of people who had ordered sweaters or different things, or just wanted to be alerted when there were sales or whatever. When I opened the store, I spent days calling people going, hi, I just wanted to let you know that I've opened a store and, blah, 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 and gave them the address and everything. And then we'd also use that phone list for sales and things too. So, that was all the old school techniques.
School techniques. Yeah, with the internet at that time, you have to be creative in other ways.
It's kind of mind-boggling. And I wish, I had some of my early brochures. I wish I had them like right available because they just look hilarious now. But I would literally take pictures with a film camera, develop them at the drugstore like we did in those days, cut them out with scissors and glue them on to a piece of paper to make your brochure. And we did have Kinko's. There was color photocopying. So I
Yeah.
would take them to Kinko's and photocopy them. and then give those out. It's like wild.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think I must have picked up one of your brochures or
Isn't that
little
crazy?
postcards because I saw that post that you made recently. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, this really brings back memories now." Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it also, now that you're mentioning that catalog, I might have it here. Am I going to be lucky enough? Let's see. I think another thing that worked out really well by accident, like you asked, was this all part of a master plan? No, not at all. I knew nothing about business. I didn't even know how to get a job. So I was a fine arts major. I'd studied photography and I moved to Toronto because I went to school in Montreal. I moved to Toronto and I'm like, I had no real intention of like, I'm going to start a job and, start a business in fashion because it was so insane. Like, how would I do that?
Mhm.
But I had been making things and selling them as a teenager. I had a bikini business in high school and I made jewelry and stuff like that. So I kind of had this like, oh, you can make things and sell them kind of mentality. But another thing that was really standy outy was the Knitting Queen. So that's the cover of the
Mhm.
catalog. This is a catalog that fell apart, sadly. So there you can see some of the styles and stuff. But I did this kind of shtick of like, I'm Laura Jean the Knitting Queen. So you can see I've got a yarn wig and I'm wearing a crown. And then I called the assistants who worked in my shop and who helped with the production. I called them knitting princesses. And that knitting queen thing became so sticky, like years after I stopped knitting. People would be like, wait, aren't you Laura Jean the Knitting Queen? So I think that, I was unexpectedly getting these lessons in business in terms of branding and in terms of making yourself stand out. And in terms,
Mhm.
oh, yeah, another thing, now you're making me realize how much that made me stand out. Another thing I did was this is at the back of the catalog. And I made handmade buttons. So my buttons were shaped like a cat face or a flower or like all of these different things that made it really unique. And in my shop, you could even pick out, I had, those little drawers where you store like nails and things. I had buttons where people could pick out their buttons. And so that became a sales lesson of mine where I would see someone trying on a sweater. And if I told them about the buttons at the right moment, their decision would switch from should I get this sweater to, ooh, which buttons should I pick? So I realized that was another thing that, ended up being like, this makes it really unique. And suddenly they're fishing through trying to find all the blue cats that are going to make their sweater look perfect. Or we
Mhm.
had letter buttons so they could get their name. So yeah,
Yeah.
even though it was a totally different time, the basics still apply. It's the exact same thing of like making your business unique, your unique value proposition, your branding that stands out, that's catchy, that makes people, excited. All that stuff, it's all the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that really is what made you different, unique, and made you stand out at the time because I still remember that
Yeah.
shop and those colorful sweaters. And it just felt it was different at the time
Mhm.
amongst like, all kind of like the sort of more darker, subdued type of looking things that were out there. But yours just really had color, and
Yeah. And you've hit on something when you said what's the state of the fashion industry in general is that I did notice it creeping in over the years that there was when I started, I feel like it was a real what do you call it? Like antidote, I guess, to like sort of the normal, boring mainstream stuff that was out there. But bit by bit, like fast fashion came in. So, we're talking about the mid 90s when I started, which some people watching this will be like not even born yet or in kindergarten or something. But so it's like a really long span of time. And in that time, something happened with like retail laws where more and more, American stores or international stores could come in. So H&M, Old Navy, Zara, like those were all things that didn't exist back in the 90s when I started. I don't know exactly what year they came in, but over the 2000s, it just became more and more and more availability of fast fashion. I guess like riskier moves, like fast fashion allowed the fashion that was out there to be more different and to be more, I remember when I first started hearing about H&M and I'd see someone in a dress, I'd be like, that's a cute dress, thinking that it had to be a vintage find because it was so unique looking. And they'd be like, oh, I got it for like $39 at H&M. And I'd be like, what is this H&M place? So I feel like that was one major shift that happened where it was like, then you could get cute things or bright colored things or different looking things more easily. And then that just became more and more and more and more.
Yeah, and that just kind of eventually flooded the market,
Mhm.
with just so much stuff and how we ended up where we are right now.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Overconsumption, overproduction, but that's a whole other conversation for another day.
Mhm.
But let me just get back to you. You, as you are running multiple stores, not a small feat. What were some of the biggest operational or financial challenges that you faced during that time?
Well, it's hard to even be able to fit them all into this podcast. But, no surprise, the biggest one was cash flow. So, um, the like, Q1 is brutal in retail. So January, February, March would be the time of just like hoping that we can get through till whatever comes after March, April and May. May was typically a good month. Like May and December were the good months for, spring shopping and Christmas. But then weather always became a problem. So I remember one year I was sitting there, like looking at the sales, looking at the numbers and thinking, we have to have a really good Christmas this year. And I'm thinking, okay, well, as long as there isn't like, some crazy ice storm or whatever, it should be fine. We've got 2 weekends to go. And of course, before Christmas. So there was always that feeling of like, and of course, that was the year that there was a gigantic ice storm and power went out and everybody was stranded everywhere. So it was just a total wash. Like both of the weekends were horrible before Christmas and, the whole 9 yards. So the, I guess like the biggest challenge of retail is the high rent and high expenses. So when I had the collective model, which was what I started on, the advantage was that it kind of had this steady cushion of keeping the staffing managed and the rent managed. But there were other problems with that, of course, where it was like, have dealing with designers like dropping out or dealing with, you know, just the whole thing or even planning product. That was another thing that became sticky is that we could end up with a whole store full of, let's say, just brown skirts or whatever the trend was that year, and nothing to go with them necessarily, or just kind of nothing, like no variety. So the limitations of the sort of collective model, what do you say, it's like at a certain point, I don't even remember how many years I operated with that model, probably 10ish in terms of Fresh Collective, like the Fresh Collective brand. But then I started sort of phasing that out and introducing more where we bought clothes. So we started carrying lines like yoga jeans or different Canadian lines, Matt and Nat bags, and then another bag line, which I've forgotten the name, Pixie Mood. So we started bringing in different products so we could control more the inventory and the selection and really make a better customer service, like a better and consistent customer service experience for the customers. So I guess it was kind of like that collective model, I would say, was really like necessary to get started, and it was great and it was fun and it had all kinds of great things, but we hit limitations, and it drove me crazy to have customers come in wanting things that we just didn't have or couldn't make available due to that model. And so then that became a shift of like hiring more professional retail managers and putting in systems and buying stock and continuing some consignment, some different models with different people, but just kind of mixing it up more.
So, maybe to go with that question, what worked for you? Would you say what really helped you to, you know, grow, scale that business and be able to have this longevity for over 20 years in retail? It's not easy, right?
It's
So,
not
yeah. So maybe what you could tell us is like sort of, yeah, what led to your
that I could
success?
say like one particular thing worked because I feel like there so many things worked at the time. Like the collective model worked to get it started and got me connected with all these designers and brought a whole bunch of energy and all that stuff. So that worked amazingly. I guess nothing works perfectly, right? And then, but what really allowed it to grow was putting systems in. And really, for me, it was a big shift between sort of my small business and a company. And so when the systems, and that took like a long time, building those systems and documenting them and training people on them and having them really just flow throughout the whole business, but it allowed me to not be the bottleneck anymore. So people didn't have to come to me and be like, prior to that, my small business, everything lived in my head. So it was like, can we buy this fabric for The clothing line, sure. Can we do, oh, we need a new stapler for Kensington. Okay, I'll add it to my list, or go buy one. I've approved it, or whatever. It just was it was all me. And I, of course, at the time didn't really know how to do and how to make it anything else. But then I read the book, The E-Myth Revisited, subtitled Why Most Small Businesses Don't Work and What to Do About It. And that book talks about really building your small business into a company. Like, it described me perfectly as the sort of frantic business owner
Mhm.
who, was running around doing everything. And if I got hit by a bus, the business was gone. And this really, the step of adding the systems and creating all of that stuff, including like an org chart, different positions, like we really created like a company flow to it where people had their jobs and it was understood, what they could make decisions on or not. And we had like meetings to review the things and, all that stuff. So that made it run a lot smoother. If there was one thing that made a difference, that made a difference. I couldn't have got to a 7-figure business without that.
Okay. And so, sort of like, did you have help with, putting the system together? Or was it like just sort of this moment after you read the book, the E Myth, and then you got the idea to like, oh my gosh, I can't be doing everything myself. I'm going to have to, put a system in place. Like, did you hire anybody, like a consultant or anybody to help you with that?
Yeah. Yep. I did. I actually, well, after I read the E-Myth book, then I did hire a coach from E-Myth Worldwide. Like, they have a program. So I did that for about 6 months and I cried most of the time through it because I was like, I think I was 17 years into my business at that point, and I just felt like, my God, I've been doing things so chaotically and I could have, like, there was a better way and I just didn't know about it. And so it really just felt like, oh my God, like this sort of, yeah, just, I guess, regret that I didn't do it sooner. So then I really understood the value of like coaching and expertise and so on. And so over time, I've hired different coaches for different reasons, or I take a course on like, marketing, or, whatever. I'm always looking to build something in that's like, whether it's self improvement for myself to be a better entrepreneur, or it's something to build into the business or whatever. There's just kind of always room for expert help, basically.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
just so saw the difference of like, I can struggle through things on my own, or I can hire someone who knows how to do this. And then I know how to do it. Oh,
Yeah.
it's just night and day.
Saves you a whole lot of time and headaches
Yeah,
in the end,
for
right?
sure.
And so looking back, is there one lesson from retail ownership that you think that every entrepreneur should hear or know about?
Well, I don't know that there's one exactly. Since we're talking about systems, I would definitely say systems. And I would definitely say remaining flexible, like always being able to, deal with the shifting circumstances, whatever that is, if it's the industry is changing or the weather or any of those things. I think a big misconception about retail is that you just sit in the store and wait for customers to come. And it's just not that at all. Like, it's the key to succeeding is being constantly busy and working on making sure those customers come in. So whether it's while you're there, you're sending out emails to your customer base and letting them know their favorite brand, just came in, or whatever, right? You just have to figure out how to make the most of your time and drive the business forward. You just cannot be passive.
Mhm. Okay. So from that, I got the importance of these three things: having systems in place, being flexible, having flexibility to, pivot or evolve depending on what is happening in the economic or landscape, and then also being able to stay top of mind to your customers and communicating with them through various channels, emails, I guess. So let's just say talk about your pivot to coaching now. So what inspired you to transition from working or having a retail store to being a fashion or a business coach now?
Yeah, I feel like it's funny because I resisted the business part in the early days and I felt like I'm not a business person. I just want to do my creative stuff. And I would dream. I'm sure every creative person dreams about somebody like a business-minded person who's just going to take control of the business side. And then you can just do your own creative fun stuff or whatever. So that was sort of my dream for a long time, that some businessy person would rescue me. But then and all that time I was learning about business because I had to survive. I also got very early on, I got into a women's entrepreneurship program. which was really helpful too. So like, yeah, for sure. Over time, it was like always learning, always trying to find some new, new stuff to, roll into the business and make it stronger. Okay. So pre-pandemic, I'll just kind of 2019, I actually had 5 brick and mortar business locations. So I had 3 locations of my fashion boutiques. And then I had the daycare, which was a co-ownership with the woman who founded it. And I got into that because my son was, just very briefly, I got into that because my son was one of the first clients there, one of the first kids. The woman who started it for her own kids. And then she was running it as a side project because she had a full-time job. She was finding it hard to get it up and going. And I was one of the parents. So I was like, she was talking, we got to know each other and stuff. And she was like, yeah, I'm really struggling, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I think I could help you. So we talked about it and I became her partner. So we did it 50-50, and I took everything I'd learned from, retail stores and branding and fashion business, all that stuff, and poured it into the daycare. That was a really good lesson in realizing how transferable the skills are. And I kind of got, at that moment, I kind of got, oh, this is my trade. Like I have a trade where I know how businesses are structured, small businesses, and I know the personalities and I know the pitfalls. And I started to really kind of look at where I can guide people. And I would get calls from people going like, I love your stores. I want to open something like that somewhere, wherever, San Francisco, Nova Scotia, like these different people would reach out to me. And I remember the first time I said, actually, yes, I can help you. Definitely. I do that, as a thing or whatever. Obviously I worded it better, but I said, and I charge $85 an hour. And she goes, that's fine. And at that time, I just thought, this is insane. I might have said I charge $2 million an hour, I just couldn't believe that she was like, that's fine. And so I met with her and she just picked my brain. I gave her advice, whatever. Like it wasn't any kind of formal coaching situation, but I was like, I'm getting paid for this. And I really had a love for, anytime one of my friends or whatever would be like thinking of opening a business, I'd be all over them like, oh, I'll help you. I just loved it. I love teaching. I love passing on what I know. I loved just the whole thing. I would get so excited. And
Okay.
I was doing that a lot with the designers who were joining me because I wanted them to stick around and pay their rent and continue in that collective concept. If their stuff wasn't selling, they would just be like, I'm going to drop out, and they'd give their 1 month's notice and leave. So I guess there's 2 things combined. I just loved it. I love giving advice. I love meddling in other people's business. And so it was really fun for me to say like, oh, I think if you, made some smaller earrings or you had something at a different price point, just all of the different kind of strategy for them of product development, branding, you know, everything. So then I kind of made it an official part of the stores where I had monthly meetings and then I had one-on-one business coaching sessions with them. So that started around like early 2000s. And I was doing it as part of the Fresh Collective package. If you join us, you get this sort of, so it kind of became like a little bit of an incubator for fashion designer entrepreneurs, I guess you could say, in a retail environment. So I don't remember like what year it was I started expanding beyond that, but a good 10, 13 years ago or something, I was like, I think I could just I had helped other kinds of businesses through my friends or, just ad hoc, whatever. But to make it official and be like, I'm hanging out a shingle, this is it. I'm a business coach now. And I put it out there and started networking and just building up a clientele and hosting events and talking to people. And I had it in the back of my mind that it was like, oh, this is the next thing for me because retail's like 7 days a week, it was great when I was in my 20s and 30s, but for now going into the future, I want less overhead. I want to not worrying about, the window smashing in the middle of the night at the store, like all of that stuff. It's just, this is such a freer and easier kind of thing. So back to 2019, I had 5 brick and mortar businesses, 3 boutiques, the daycare, and another business that was in startup mode, which was going to be like a wellness place like with different practitioners and whatever, and it all just went kaboom in 2020. Well, we lost the lease on the daycare and you can't just move a daycare, and then with Fresh Collective just kind of honestly in a decline. Like it was just 2017 was a good year, 2018 was like 2019 was like And I was like, 2020 has to be a turnaround year or I'm out. And we all know what happened in 2020.
Yes.
So I just pulled the plug and like, I'm not saying I just pulled the plug. It was stressful. It was hard emotionally, but I had everything, all 5 places were closed. And I remember like picking things out of my Google Calendar going like, that life is over. Like all of these pre-scheduled events that I had that were all about living that workaholic lifestyle just disappeared from my calendar. And I'm like, wow, now what do I create? So that's kind of what brought me here.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, we all know what happened in 2020, and yeah, we just want to forget about it, put
I
all
know.
of that behind us as if it never happened. But it had affected so many businesses, and some, rose from it and just like thrived and came out stronger. And unfortunately, yeah, we also lost some businesses along the way,
Uh-huh.
which was really sad and unfortunate. And yeah, being in retail is like just hearing, like seeing the stories on the news of like this retailer closing down, that retail closing down. It's like heartbreaking, really. And yeah, but fortunate for you that, with the 2 decades of experience that you have and you built a name for yourself, and, you mentioned that people were coming to you asking for advice and were just like, yeah, they'll pay you $85 an hour, no problem. You could have charged more. But yeah, that must have been so validating. And it's been like that, I guess, and helped you to transition to coaching now, which is great. And I think it kind of almost like our two stories just kind of like, have very similar stories in our paths. And, how I went from a clothing brand, having a product based business, to now, doing digital marketing, offering a service, being a service provider now, and like, using my, that knowledge and expertise that I have, right, to help people with that.
Uh-huh.
And so it sounds like, how you have that also that passion to help others. Many fashion entrepreneurs dream of scaling. What key decisions or strategies allowed you to grow your retail business to 7 figures and so forth? If you want to speak about that.
Key decisions. I mean, I feel like it's the same. It's the same that we talked about with the systems. And really it's something, systems are something I resisted too, like when I first heard about them, because of course I went into having my own business because I'm like, I need to be a free butterfly. I need to do my fun cute things, and so I wanted my life to be like fun and cute, but there was this the hard side of running a business that was so, like, I don't want to say it was bad or anything, but it was just so chaotic. It was just not it was a business that, was set up by a person in their 20s who knew nothing about business. And so my perception of what business was, like business, was, that it was I'm thinking of like American Psycho, like Christian Bale in American Psycho, like that stereotype, or Wall Street, or these movies that, like these 80s movies, like late 80s, when it was really, the culture was like yuppies and get ahead and make money and like greed is good or whatever, like all that stuff. So I feel like that was kind of there on me because it was only a few years later. And that was sort of what my impression of what business was. It was cutthroat. It was unethical. It was, mean, like all that stuff. Well, there I am thinking like, I don't want anything to do with that stuff. I just want to make my cute stuff and sell it. But I realized that open, and I also thought it was very male, like a male thing. When I pictured a smart business person, I pictured like a man in a suit or, with a briefcase or whatever, like just stuff that didn't even enter my world. There was a shift where, when I guess, bit by bit, I started to have successes, of course, as we do. And I started to feel like I'm getting good at this business thing. Like, I think I'm getting good at this. And so, of course, that gave me confidence to continue and learn more and try new things and whatever. This was the decision shift that really changed for me, because I had this image, I went to school for fine arts and whatever, and it was a sensitive, I'm still a sensitive person, but I've got a lot of a tougher skin now. But I thought I was sort of like a wimpy, sensitive person, like just not cut out for this business stuff and whatever. And there was a moment where I thought, what if I shifted my creativity to the business? Like, what if I treated the business as an art and something that could, move people and connect with people and make a difference for people, and really kind of put that same creative energy into driving sales and making the experience amazing for customers and doing all those things. And that really helped me shift and see that it was something I was capable of, that it was valuable, that it could be done in a way that wasn't, ruthless and cutthroat and all those things. And so that really helped me to make it my own. And different things happened along the way. Like, for whatever reason, I got another thing was media in those days, you'd send out press releases because that would be a way to amplify your business. So I was in the Toronto Star and, I was getting known for what I was doing and stuff. So I would often get asked to do things about being an entrepreneur, different things like that. I just remembered this. You probably don't even know this. I've got my little box of pictures because I've been going through. So I co-hosted a TV show. I found this little framed picture in all my stuff in the mid 90s. I think it was maybe 96. It was on TV Ontario. Like, I guess it's kind of like PBS or something, but it was an educational show on how to have a business and, run it. And so, and it was co-hosted with Kingy Carpenter from Peach Berserk. So that was one of our wacky girl boss things we did together. And yeah, so we hosted the show and we went and interviewed people about different business models and, what's working for them and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I mean, all of that stuff kind of added up where it was like, I think I'm kind of getting good at this business thing.
Get good at this. But I feel like you guys are just sort of like ahead of this curve of now, I feel people are opening up a little bit more, and looking to collaborate. They're more open to the idea of collaboration, sharing. But I really felt that back then, really in the 90s, early 2000s, everything was kind of quite really close, and people didn't want to share their whatever trade secrets with people. Yeah, but it seemed just so serious or something. And then I felt like the two of you and Kingy, just like this. I could see how you guys totally hit it off when you met because Kingy's brand is just so colorful,
Yeah.
yours as well. And these two sort of young, entrepreneurs coming out like with all this colorful hair and stuff and kind of like, hey, we're talking business and everything. It's probably stood out. Yeah. Amongst
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you guys are, yeah, really, I think, sort of ahead of what was actually going on,
Yeah.
in that.
Well, I think also none of this was strategic decisions of like, oh, we should do a collaboration. It was like we were broke and it was just way more fun to do things together. So collaborations were just kind of natural. And her store was the first store I started selling my sweaters at. I remember I brought in 5 and then I'd phone her every day on the landline because that's how we communicated in those days. I'm like, did I sell yet? And finally, one day she called me like 3 days into it or whatever. And she was like, the green and purple one sold. So for me, it was definitely just the feeling of, girl bossing together. I don't
Before
usually
that
use the word girl
term
boss.
even existed. Yeah, you were girl bosses.
I don't use that word, but
Before girl boss.
normally,
Yeah.
but it's kind of suitable here for sure. Yeah, so it was just more fun to do things together and stuff. And I guess maybe you don't know about this either, but when I first arrived in Toronto, I took her silkscreen workshop. That was how I got in with her. That was how I infiltrated her world. And I just loved it. I was like, this is amazing. I silkscreened my own stuff and whatever. But then, and her place is still like this. If anybody wants to go hang out at Kingy's place, she just had it. We called it the cult because everybody just floated there. So everybody in our little gang would show up and we'd go out for beers that night or whatever. And, it was just this casual thing where whatever, we'd either work for free in our spare time or work on our own projects or just hang out or whatever. And it was just fun.
Mhm.
Oh my God, I keep going on these stories and then forgetting my train of thought. Oh, but so it was, yes, the collaboration part. So it was just natural. It was like a natural collaboration to be, figuring out things to do together or whatever, because we were right there and we had no money. So we just had to come up with creative ideas and do them. So we would send out press releases together and we were on City Line and our clothes went together really well. So that was another win. where, it went like a silkscreen dress of hers and then a cute little cardigan of mine over. And it was like amazing. But yeah, that ended up being such a strong part of how I like to do business because it's just way more fun to do it with people you like, and have fun doing it and stuff. So
Yeah, I think
it
you
was pretty
really
awesome.
have, if I would
I know
just
what I was going to
say,
tell you.
yeah, go ahead.
So my first Toronto business, even before I started the sweaters, I did shrinky dink earrings based on Kingy's silkscreen designs. Did you know about that? That rendition of my business? Do you know what shrinky dink is?
Yes,
Shrink
I
plastic that you
love
put in
those.
the oven.
Yes, I think I had a little package of Smurfs ones.
Yeah,
You color them and then you cut them out and you put in the oven and then they shrink into this kind of like hard plastic that
you
you
got
can
it.
then, yeah, turn into earrings or whatever.
So that's what my buttons were made out of. That was sort of my secret sauce with the sweaters, to have the custom made buttons all made out of shrinky dink. And then I did like a resin coating. I did so much product testing to get them durable and machine washable and everything. But prior to that, the shrinky dink, when I was working at Kingy's and I was really new there, I'd been there like a month or whatever. And I'm thinking it'd be so cool if we could do earrings or other accessories with her designs on them. And it just was like this flashback of doing shrinky dink, probably with Smurfs on it, back in the 80s with my friend and her little sisters. And I was like, I wonder if that stuff still exists. And I went to Lewis Craft on my bike and got some and did prototypes and brought them into her and said, I got really nervous when I showed them. So I'm like 22 and I'm like, I was thinking we could make some jewelry with your prints. And then I pulled out my little prototypes and she was like, oh my God. And I thought for a second that she was going to go, these are my designs. How dare you? But she was like, these are amazing. I can't believe I'm seeing my drawings. She had little cocktail glasses and little like glamour gals and all these cute things. And she was like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. So that was my first thing. And I made jewelry for her business for, I don't know how, like 10 years or something. So it's crazy. You just don't ever know, right? You get
You
some
just
idea
never,
and then
yeah,
just do it.
absolutely. I think you were just kind of following your passion and you just had that in
Mm.
you and you're just doing what you loved,
I
right?
think
And having fun along the way and it so happened to be a business.
Yeah, I often will follow a curiosity. Like it becomes sort of an obsession where it's like, I wonder if I could make this out of that. And yeah, some of them go in the garbage. Some of them are bad prototypes and they never go anywhere. And some of them evolve into a business that's like lasts for decades. So, you know,
Yep. It's
who
true.
knows?
So, for someone who's listening today and is running a fashion brand, a retail store, boutique, and wants to grow, where should they start?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because it's like, I don't know where they're at. You know what I mean? If they're starting
Depends
from
where they are.
scratch, I can answer that. But if they're
Okay.
already running a business, then that's a little bit of a tricky one because you got to see what's kind of where the gap is. If you're starting out, in fact, I do have a story for you. Earlier I said, I don't think I have a story like that. I have a really great success story. This is a client who was not in fashion at all, but like a service provider. So I don't want to give more identifying details because it might identify her or whatever. And I'm always protective of my client's privacy, of course. But so she signed up for a 6-month package with me. And the first thing I said was market research. I said, you have to figure out who you're serving and what their needs are, what keeps them up at night, what words they're using, everything. And she went for it and she came back with all this information and we started building from there. So we were like, okay, so looking at these different types of people, which ones do you think are the best to, go like treat as a target market, etc. And then from there we built and we used the words that they said in the market research to start creating the marketing that was going to talk directly to them. So it was things like overwhelmed and don't know where to start. Perfect. That's what we heard on those calls. So it's just what I love about it. What I love about hindsight, like for me, hindsight is 2020. I never did any market research. Are you kidding? In fact, I thought I knew better. I wanted to make the cute things that I thought were great. And then my first market research was realizing that I'm in my 20s. I'm not now in my 20s, but at the time I was in my 20s. The sweaters that I wanted to make were like really bright, really cropped, really wild, bright. The first one that sold was lime green and purple stripes, and it was cropped. But I did start to realize that the women who are going to spend money on this are not me. They're not, they, I'm broke. They're the version of me that went into a corporate job and makes money and they've been at it for 10 years and they want funky stuff to express their creativity. and they've got the money to spend on it. So I had to shift my mindset and start learning what these women in their is probably mid 30s, what size are they? What do they like? Do they want really short crop things? No, most of them don't. They want a sweater they can wear to work and it still looks cute. So that was my market research, only dealing with the why my stuff wasn't selling as well as I wanted it to. But to love, nothing I love more than a client who comes to me from the beginning, because we don't have to dismantle mistakes. We get to start fresh and start with market research, start figuring out what all of the good stuff. What are your competitors doing? What's going to make you stand out? Why are you different? Who are your clients? What's going on with them? How can you even start building a community of clients before you even make one thing? Or if
Mhm.
you've made a few prototypes, how can you get them out to the people to test them? So it's all about minimum viable product and doing things just smart and smooth, man. Smart and smooth. That's
Uh,
what it's all about.
yeah.
If
Okay, so
only.
I guess you would say who your ideal client would be someone who's starting out, and you are helping them from the very beginning to get like the foundations in place, I guess, and
Yeah,
doing the things that
to
you
build
didn't
it.
even know about when you started your business.
Exactly, exactly. That I only learned about afterwards. Everything I learned after, like, I was like, oh, I guess that was. I remember we shifted the entire business model and everyone was freaking out and whatever. And then we learned after that, I was reading some article and I learned the term change management. And I'm like, oh, change management would have been good here because we did it with no change. We didn't manage the change at all. We just made changes and freaked everyone out. So yes, for me, my ideal client is someone I go a lot on vibe. Obviously, there are some businesses. If someone wants to start an airline, I'm not your coach. But if you're like a service provider, a fashion, a maker, a jewelry designer, a photographer, whatever, and you want to set up the business structure and strategy and really pinpoint your ideal clients, it gets me so excited because it's like we just get the waste out of the way right away. We start from square one and just build it all nice. Yeah, a very ideal client for me is someone leaving corporate, like a woman in her mid 30s, let's say, who's leaving corporate. She's got a lot of skills and experience. She's ready to go for it. She's an action taker and she digs my vibe. That's pretty much my ideal
Amazing.
client.
Yeah. I just think that, knowing who your ideal client is very important. No matter what stage of business you're in, I have some clients who have been in business for a number of years and still are not clear.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, about their ideal customer, avatar, or buyer personas yet. They're still a little unclear. So I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, you got to go back and really think about this, because it's important and it really affects everything that you do in your messaging and your marketing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And also, like, that's what I'll work on with people as well, is that I feel like that kind of work is hard to do in your own head. And a lot. Let's just be honest. A lot of the work we do that has to do with sort of the visioning and creation of the business and whatever is very hard to do in your own head because you have no perspective on it. So for one thing, you're like dealing with all your failures. And so that you're carrying that with you, where we all have failures. So when you work with an outside person, they can pull out the strengths and help you put aside the weaknesses that you're worried about, etc. And I can, like, when I work with a client, I'll help them define their ideal client. So, and it does take a while. Even in coaching, it took me ages, and it'll change again because that's what happens as things change, right? But I think an important part of understanding who your ideal client is also like who makes you the happiest and who has you perform at your best. So for me, part of my focus on my ideal client being an action taker, liking my vibe, as kind of vague as a description as that is, when I'm working with someone, it's like you and me chatting. It's like, there's like a quickness to the way we talk and we're excited and there's like a high energy and stuff like that. And when I'm working with someone who's like that, it allows me to be like that. And then we get into this creative magic zone where we are creating magic together for their business, which is just wild and fun and where I want to be. And I've worked with clients who aren't such a great fit, and I can definitely help them and, go through the steps that it takes to make a business. It's not like I dislike that or whatever. It's great, fine work, and it's fun to help different kinds of people succeed. No problem. But I like the magic zone. I like it when I get to work with someone for a long period, like 6 months. and we really get each other and I really get their personality and I'll start to go, I hear that imposter syndrome sneaking in or whatever, like I know where they go to hide. I know where they think that they're, going to fail or whatever. And I get to just be with that and help them get through it. And it's just so fun and exciting for me.
Yeah, there's just so many benefits to working with somebody um, because, oftentimes if you're an entrepreneur or solopreneur, you're just kind of like left with your own thoughts and what you're saying self, what's going on in your mind. But having that sort of outside perspective to help guide you and sort of like get you through some of the hurdles that you have. And oftentimes, a lot of the times, actually, it's yourself that's holding yourself back. And you're like, you don't want to do certain things because it makes you feel uncomfortable. Like, that's what
Mhm.
I find with myself. I'm like, oh, I'm going to avoid doing, I got to go do
Yeah.
some PR here, but let me go do something else.
It's something
And I
very
never end
important to
up
deal with
doing
in the
it.
shed in the backyard right now.
Yeah.
Well, that it's 100%. It's funny. Somebody once was talking to me and about my business or whatever, and she was like, "Oh, 3 stores and whatever." And she goes, "Wow, you must have had to really fight to get where you are," which like honestly just struck me kind of odd to begin with. I was like, fight. But my first thought was only myself did I have to fight because I had so many thought like selling, like in the early days, 95 or whatever. I would still work at Kingy's part time. I think I worked 2 days a week or whatever. And so I'd be silk screening fabric, and she'd be like, "Those people are looking at your sweaters." And I'd be like, "Well, I don't want to talk to them." Of course she wants the artist, the designer, the maker to go talk to the customers and tell them why it's special, and they're going to be like, "Oh, we got to meet the designer." And I'm just thinking like, I can't even deal with this. What am I going to say to those people? And so I would just make her do it. But she started forcing me to go talk to people because it was like, you got to learn to sell or you're not going to succeed in business. And now, oh my God, am I good at selling? Well, it's just so natural. It was all my hangups. Really, I had hangups about selling that weren't true. All selling is, relationships and conversation and pointing out it's just not what I thought it was. It's not pushing crap on people they don't want. It's not that at all. It's just being friendly and great and going, yes, the purple is awesome. Why don't you try the pink one too? Look at this. And then when the time is right, you can also change the buttons.
Hmm.
You want me to change the buttons for you? It just takes a few minutes to sew them on. And they're like, buttons?
Oh, there you go. See, you're natural. But I guess it took you a
30
while to,
It
yeah,
took me 30 something years to be this natural.
yes.
Definitely a process.
Amazing. Okay. So, before we go, I guess I just want to ask you one last question. If you had to boil it down to one or two pieces of advice that you would want to give to an aspiring fashion entrepreneur in 2025, what would it be?
I guess I would say like it's fresh on my mind, but it is a huge piece of it is get out of your own way. Get over your fears, get over your hangups, you get help if you need it. It's a thing. Like running a business is a separate thing, as is being a dentist and knowing how to fill a cavity, or being a veterinarian, like, or an accountant or whatever. Like there's something about being in business that's sort of presented, or being an entrepreneur that's sort of presented as easy. Like anyone can start a business. It's so fantastic. And yeah, it is great and anybody can start a business, but don't expect it to be easy. I guess don't expect it to challenge your sense of yourself. I think that would be the most important thing. If you can deal with yourself and your blocks and hangups, then you can learn all the rest of the stuff. You just have to be able to be ready to embark on the journey.
Yep. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Well, they can always go to my website, which is laura-jean.ca. And that's my coaching website. And if you have any questions or what, if people can just contact me, there's a form there or whatever. And yeah, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Laura Jean, for sharing your story with us. It's been so inspiring to hear how you've built multiple purpose driven businesses with heart, creativity, and a deep commitment to helping others succeed.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been so great. Really fun chatting.
Yeah.